These days, running for president can be as taxing for a spouse as it is for a candidate. I talked about that in Chicago this week with Michelle Obama. The 44-year-old graduate of Princeton and Harvard Law School was born and raised on the south side of Chicago, where her late father worked as a water pump operator for the city, and her mother stayed home to raise her and her older brother, Craig, who coaches basketball at Brown. Michelle Obama is now traveling 2 to 4 days a week and is on leave from her job as a vice president with the University of Chicago Medical Center. When she's on the road, her mother cares for her two daughters, 9-year-old Malia and 6-year-old Sasha.
Can we do this?
Her husband says she's such an effective advocate, he calls her the closer.
My husband and the next president of the United States, Barack Obama.
You've seen the crowds, the way they embrace your husband. Some commentators have even used the word messianic. Mm-hmm. Do you ever worry that the whole thing, the whole movement, is a little over the top for some voters?
Barack and I talk about this all the time. We talked about it before the decision to run. Because when you're really trying to make serious change, you don't want people to get caught up in the emotion. Because change isn't emotion, it's real work, organization, and strategy. That's just the truth of it. I mean, you pull people in with inspiration, but then you've got to roll up your sleeves, and you've got to make sacrifices, and you've got to have structure.
Your husband's experience has been repeatedly questioned. Some voters worry that with 3 years in the Senate, he needs a little more experience under his belt before he's ready. What do you tell people who are worried about that?
I tell people that, you know, in our politics, we measure experience by this very narrow definition. Now, when was the last time we've had a president of the United States who spent years working on the streets in a major city, for years working with people who never had a voice, helping them find their voice, and advocating for better streets, cleaner streets, safer communities? Somebody who has worked as a constitutional law scholar, civil rights attorney for years. Barack has more legislative experience than Hillary Clinton does. Barack has spent 8 years, in addition to his work as a U.S. Senator, in the state legislature. Barack is highly experienced. It's not conventional experience that we're used to seeing because most people have spent a whole lot of time in Washington.
If it ends up being a race against your husband and John McCain, his campaign, Senator McCain's, will undoubtedly focus on the lack of, your husband's lack of foreign policy experience. How will you combat that?
One of the things Barack will say is that, you know, we're right now in a war that should have never been authorized and never been waged. People like John McCain and people with a whole lot of years in Washington who looked at a situation and they read it wrong.
But what about September 11th? I mean, I think the country wants to be reassured that the person in the Oval Office will know how to respond.
You know, one of the things we can't do in this country is operate from a place of fear. How are we going to reestablish our footing in the world and change our conversations globally so that we move to a different place in how we deal with issues of terrorism? That we're, you know, instead of protecting ourselves against terrorists, that we're building diplomatic relationships and we're investing in education abroad so that we're making sure that kids are learning how to read as opposed to, you know, fight us. We've spent 8 years gearing ourselves up for a fight and we haven't been educating our kids. We don't have universal health care. I think that's going to be the debate that Barack has, is how are we going to direct our energy? Are we going to gear up for a fight, or are we going to work to heal our nation?
This must be an extremely heady experience for both of you. And I know you have said he's always had a healthy ego. How do you keep it in check?
You know, he's got a healthy ego because anybody who decides that they're going to be president of the United States has to think well of themselves. But the truth is there are a lot of bumps and bruises along this, campaign trail. There are a lot of humbling experiences. I mean, as I said, Barack has spent most of this year being the person that had no chance of winning.
Do you ever look at your husband, and does he ever look at you, and do you say, can you believe this?
Oh, yeah. It's probably once a week now. Yeah, absolutely. This is a trip.
Tomorrow we'll have more on the personal side of Michelle Obama, how she met her husband of 15 years, how their daughters are handling the campaign, and if she's found herself having to censor herself out on the stump. And I'll be back with more CBS News in a moment.